Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. I'm excited to bring you this solo episode today. We get a lot of frequently asked questions in the aviation insurance business, obviously with clients we've worked with for years, and then obviously from some people in our audience. And so we're just going to cover a few of these frequently asked questions, and some of them will be kind of higher level questions, and then we'll get into the weeds on a few smaller questions, and we'll try to keep it brief and to the point for you. But the first question that we have is, what is aviation insurance? And that is a loaded question. Aviation insurance is actually a lot of things, and depends on your perspective. But aviation insurance can mean aircraft insurance, which is applicable to so many people. And we'll dig into that just a little bit more in a bit. But it could mean, general liability coverages for airports, aviation businesses. That includes the airline sector. It includes space coverages for, so it's really, aerospace insurance to be a little bit more specific. But when we're talking about the aviation insurance industry, these are all things that protect the first party coverages as applicable for aviation operations. That includes aircraft. It also includes ground vehicles. It includes vehicles operating on airports. It includes hangars, property. It includes injury to the employees from third party, and injury to employees through workers' compensation. It includes injuries to passengers, to people, everyone or anything that is involved with things that go into the sky or their operations that get them into the sky is really aviation insurance. So aviation insurance has specific lines. There are often specialists for underwriting and brokering in each one of these areas, from airlines to space to general aviation aircraft to general aviation services. There's all the products manufacturers, so the manufacturers of the aircraft, the engines, all the way down to the little parts. Aviation insurance is a giant industry in terms of the type and scope of aviation risks that it covers. Now, that industry exists because all of the other insurance companies want nothing to do with the potential catastrophic risk and specialized understanding required of aviation insurance. So that's why there is an aviation insurance industry, because it has the high risk of catastrophic loss, right? It's because it's not the law of large numbers where we can kind of predict the overall losses as they can in personal automobiles and things. It requires very specific underwriting, understanding and talents. And so, obviously space, all these different sectors of aviation insurance. So it's designed to cover first party exposures. So the damage to the things we own or lease or required to insure physically. And then it provides coverage for third party type exposures, like things you might get sued for if something unfortunate happens. Most of these policies are based on when an occurrence happens, meaning, basically bodily injury or property damage or repeated exposure to some sort of event that happens. But there are specialty coverages that doesn't apply. So it's a very vast topic. So aviation insurance, it depends on who's saying it. But a lot of times people mean aircraft insurance. Maybe they mean aviation insurance for the aviation businesses. It's a vast topic, but aviation insurance, it makes up less than 1% of all worldwide aviation premiums. And yet its exposure for catastrophic loss is huge. Many airliners today have, multiple $billion limits of liability. A lot of our high-end jets are $100 million or more. Certainly in the general aviation space, $80 million or more. So a lot of exposure there. And so aviation insurance is a big thing. It means different things to different people. And that's why, because everyone else in the insurance business doesn't want the aviation risks, that's why there is a specialty aviation insurance market. So aviation insurance, that's what it is. And that question will be answered differently based on who you ask. That's why you got such a broad answer there. So that's the answer. What is aviation insurance? Without going into an entire book on the subject. So next question. What does aircraft insurance cover? Okay. So aircraft insurance, we'll talk about general aviation aircraft, for instance. Now, there are numerous carriers. Most of them work through specialty aviation insurance brokers like myself. And typically, the major coverages they're looking to cover, number one, is damage to the physical aircraft itself. Some people in the industry call this hull damage or hull coverage, meaning HULL, similar to the marine technology. See, marine terminology, I should say. Aviation insurance has a lot of its roots in marine insurance, since a lot of the property and casualty insurance today originated out of shipping insurance through Lloyd's of London. They would insure, the cargo, would it make it back or not? And so that's why we use the term hull, aircraft hull, but the technical term is aircraft physical damage coverage. And so that's the first party damage that happens as a result of an occurrence, okay? So an occurrence is when metal gets bent, right? A sudden accidental loss. So that's what an occurrence is. What it's not is mechanical breakdown. A lot of people are upset that when, they lose their engine, they set down in a field, the engine repair is not covered. Well, it's not covered because that's a mechanical issue. Now, if it's damaged in the process of setting it down in a field, well, then it's covered. So, but all coverage, physical damage, even the liability discussions we'll talk about in a little while, is based on an occurrence, right? Sudden accidental event where metal gets bent. So physical damage, we want to restore ourselves to what we would have been had that loss not occurred. So physical damage usually is, based on the insured value. So the insurance company will pay the amount that's agreed upon in the policy in the event of a total loss. It's not like automobiles where they pay you what it's worth today. So that's a big difference. So aircraft physical damage protects the aircraft owner or operator from the financial loss that would occur in the event of an occurrence that results in physical damage to the aircraft. So major point one, aircraft physical damage. Point two, major coverage area is aircraft liability, right? The things that we become legally liable for as a result of an occurrence. Again, has to be an occurrence that triggers the coverage. So this could be bodily injury to people not on the aircraft. It could be property damage to other property that's not the aircraft, or it could be injury to passengers. Most aircraft insurance policies today have one limit of liability that's a combined single limit for bodily injury to others, property damage to others, and passenger injury. A rare policy, maybe an aero application, may have those under different coverages that are available or not, but those are the three major things it covers. So if you're taxiing and run into another aircraft, that liability coverage would come under the bodily injury to others. If you ran into somebody, for instance, and causing them bodily injury, someone that's not a passenger, that's the bodily injury to others. And then third, obviously, if someone is injured while the aircraft is underway as a passenger, that's passenger legal liability. So there's typically one limit. Now, some policies, especially on light piston aircraft, they may have what's called a sublimit or a passenger sublimit, meaning of this total each occurrence limit for bodily injury, property damage, and passenger legal liability, it may be limited to, let's say, $100,000 per passenger. So if you have a 4-seat aircraft and $1 million combined single limit of liability, each passenger is only eligible for up to $100,000 of that coverage. Limits of liability are all over the board, right? Smaller aircraft, it may be $1 million each occurrence for all those combined limits we've talked about with $100,000 per passenger, and a business jet may have 300 or 500 million limits of liability, combined single limit. So depends on the exposure. And again, certain aircraft, the more expensive the limit, or the higher the limit, the more expensive it is. And obviously the more, the use of the aircraft obviously comes in. So the more, considered to be riskier the use is, the more expensive that coverage gets. So the two biggest parts of the policy, the aircraft physical damage, the aircraft liability, right? So for the things would become third party. So physical damage, first party, aircraft liability, third party. There are other coverages on the policy, such as medical payments. These are a small limit that's kind of like a no-fault coverage. that bridges the gap between, an injury and liability. So they're available for kind of medical expenses, ambulatory expenses, so on and so forth. And so that's a coverage under the policy. And then each carrier has a host of other coverages. Sometimes these are built into the policy, and sometimes these are made as for part of an endorsement. Their policy has added coverages. And so I can't sit here and tell you that each aircraft policy is going to have specific coverages, but certainly one to pay attention to is if you operate or fly non-owned aircraft. You can't, you want to make sure you protect yourself. And so you need to ensure that if you're flying non-owned aircraft, that your policy covers you and your situation for the non-owned aircraft that you are flying. And quite honestly, there are a lot of other coverages, but those are the key ones that you want to pay attention to. And honestly, that's where working with a really specialized aviation insurance broker who's going to understand your particular risk details is absolutely critical to covering the components of aircraft insurance. But those are the three that most of the premiums based on, and those are the three that you really need to look at the limits and values. The rest of the policy, you definitely need to be aware of those factors. Let's see the other list. So can flight insurance be added later? So on an aircraft insurance, can you cover it on the ground only? Say, for instance, you purchase it and it needs a period of being restored or whatever. You just want ground coverage since it's not flying. The answer is yes, in most cases. Okay. So at the end of the day, what insurance underwriters don't want to do is they don't want to go put flight coverage on it, take it off. In most cases, right? In most cases, there's some exceptions, but in most cases, they don't want to put coverage on for a couple days while you're flying it, take it off, put it on, take it off. So with most general aviation, aircraft hull and liability policies, they'll definitely, the first time you get the policy, it's going to be down for, let's say, 60 days or something like that. They will be fine writing a policy with coverage applying to aircraft ground not in motion. Liability is always on the policy. That's not an option for an aircraft insurance policy. There's some other things that can be handled on a long-term aircraft in storage that's not airworthy. That's a whole other discussion. But flight insurance can be added later in most circumstances. But what happens is, a lot of people, their aircraft will be down for 2 weeks for annual, and they're like, can I just go to ground? No, the insurance companies, that honestly would take so much work with endorsements and things that they'd have to raise premium and hire more people just to address all of those requests in most circumstances. So it can definitely be added later in most cases, but they're definitely not going to want to go on and off with flight coverage and ground coverage on a regular basis. So that answers that question. Can flight insurance be added later? The next question is, why is aircraft insurance expensive? And the reason is, well, in a lot of cases, it's not. Because if I have a value of an aircraft, the price of my car, it's actually probably going to be cheaper to insure my airplane. But at the end of the day, aircraft are much higher in value. The limits of liability are often higher. And obviously, there's a lot of other factors that go into aircraft insurance that don't happen in, let's say, automobile insurance. Number one is we don't have this law of large numbers. See, in insurance, the premiums of many pay for the claims of the few. And we just don't have that large numbers aspect in aviation insurance. And so there's fewer ways to spread the risk. Number two is if you get the same 2 or 3 people into an automobile liability policy or accident, I should say, with bodily injury, the way it works out, the way the trends are, is the liability awarded to those 3 people in an automobile accident is going to be less than what has happened if it's an aircraft accident. Aircraft accidents get sensationalized, even though far more automobile and other type of accidents happen every day. Anytime an aircraft's involved, it's a bigger deal. So obviously, as we get into business jets, airlines, things like that, the limits get very large. And so at the end of the day, the insurance company's goal is to bring in enough premium to pay for the claims and still have a manageable profit. They have to maintain reserves and they have to return shareholder profit because insurance companies are not, government or nonprofit entities. They still have to make a profit. And so at the end of the day, if there are more claims, the insurance companies have to raise rates. And so that's why, aircraft insurance costs what it costs. Because at the end of the day, let me tell you this, I've had over, a quarter century in this business. Everyone who's had a claim is really glad they had that insurance regardless of what it cost. And fortunately, if you work with good brokers like us and so many of my colleagues in the business, we're going to look for the best value in the premium cost to the coverage you get, because you do not want to skimp on coverage and try to purchase something lower. And honestly, there's a whole load of stories that could actually cost you a lot more in the long run. So that's why aircraft insurance costs what it does. At the end of the day, aircraft are expensive, their losses are expensive, and those costs keep going up. So as an industry, we want to keep getting safer, and we want to keep mitigating risks and lowering the losses. That will help improve the results for everyone. All right. The next question, do pilots need insurance? The answer is yes. What kind of insurance? Well, that's another question. Obviously, when piloting an aircraft that they don't own, where they're not specifically covered, we talked about non-owned aircraft, physical damage and liability is a great coverage to have for your operation of an aircraft that you don't own. But there's also the consideration of the pilot's life. A lot of life insurance policies will actually exclude coverage if you're a pilot or while you're piloting an aircraft. So that's something you need to check. There are plenty of companies that offer coverage, life insurance coverage for pilots, but that's something you need to make sure is covered. Pilots need to make sure that their life insurance covers them when operating an aircraft. Now, there's another coverage as well for professional pilots, pilots' loss of medical, which is a form of disability. So if a pilot loses medical, obviously cannot continue his employment as a result, there is a disability type coverage called, pilot loss of license or loss of medical coverage. So pilots definitely need to make sure they're protected, for the aircraft they're flying, for the potential physical damage exposures, for the potential liability exposures. They want to make sure their life insurance protects them, because being in an aircraft changes the picture. And again, if their career depends on it, that disability, pilot loss of license, pilot loss of medical coverage is a great one to consider. Well, that's all the frequently asked questions we're going to cover for this episode. There are so many, so we'll continue to bring you more episodes on aviation insurance or aircraft insurance, frequently asked questions. Join us again next time as we continue navigating those waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.